All right, so welcome to class, and I hope you've viewed the recording for our last class, the one that I had to re-record. You're up to date. Let me just share screen. Give me a minute. Okay, okay. So we were talking about complex sentences. I talked about the fact that complex sentences have an independent and dependent clause, what those are. We've just been joined by Iman. Welcome to class, Iman. Right. And
Assalamualaikum sir.
Alaikum Assalam. Right. And that, right, what makes a dependent clause dependent is the addition of a subordinate clause. Sorry, it's not subordinate clause, subordinating conjunction. Right. And right, the difference between that and a coordinating conjunction, which we did in compound sentences, is that a subordinating conjunction becomes part of the clause, right? Keep in mind that both these types of conjunctions add their own meaning to the sentence. Then we were listing uh, the right some of the different more often used subordinate conjunctions, which have been categorized in by their general meaning that they give. And we did the ones for comparisons. We've got than, rather than, whether, whereas, as much as. The ones that are used for time, so after, before, as soon as, until, whenever, now that. We've got the ones for concession. Acha, what does concession mean? Right? Concession means something happening despite there being some obstacle or hurdle or hindrance, right? So let me just make a note over here. Something happening, excuse my handwriting, despite uh, obstacle or some sort of hindrance. Right, so that's what concession means. Then just the highlighter. Right, so you've got though, although, and even though. Then the ones that give some sort of reason, present a reason, and you've got because, since, so that, and as. Then the ones for place, where, and wherever. Then we didn't do this in the class, but I did add them when I was recording the review, right? And so if you've seen that, you know about this. If not, right? So what we were left with were condition. Condition meaning, right? You're adding a as we say in Urdu, agar, right? So all those agars in English, right? So if, only, if, unless, once, provided that, assuming that. And then you've got the ones for manner, meaning how something happens, or right, what its state is. So how, as if, and as though. Right? As you can see, I've written where this is not an exhaustive list. These are not all the subordinate conjunctions that are used in English. There are more, but these are some of the more commonly used, right? And they have been organized in terms of their general meaning. So maybe I'll make a note of that as well. Right, so they are categorized by their general meaning. Right, their use. Now, I did mention this, I haven't shared it yet, but I do have a PDF in which I have, all of these listed and more, and example sentences on how to use, each one of these. If you want, we could, maybe do a few for practice, or I could just leave that to you. And if you have any questions about that, we can come back to it later. So I'd prefer your feedback on that. Would you want to perhaps practice a few of these in class, or would you like to move on and try it on your own? Yes? Iman, Haris,
Yes, sir.
would you like to practice making sentences using some of these conjunctions, or do you think
Yes.
you'll, or like you'll manage that on your own? And okay, you say yes. Right, Iman, your input.
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. All right. So what do we have? Yes. Okay. So let's start with comparison. Pick one, any one of these which you want to practice, or maybe I'll do that just to make it simple. We could do
मैंने
any. We're starting with comparison, so one of these, right? Rather than, I guess, if you're okay with that. So we could try, right, rather than. So we have, and we want to make a sentence out of that. Oops. Okay. So Iman has given us a sentence. I would rather sit at home and watch TV than go out. That is a nice sentence, and uh, it is not just a complex sentence. It is actually, what could be called a compound complex, right? So it's actually one step beyond this, and that tells me that you have a grasp of this. So that's very good. Kind of, kind of makes me feel that this practice is a bit redundant. But okay, Harris has given us, rather than apologizing to the teacher, he got absent the next day. That is also a good one. I like it. Okay, so what do I have? Right, just give me a moment. I'm sorry. I think your screen just went blank. Just give me a moment. Okay, so I'm going to write down a different sentence. Both your sentences are very good. Okay. You can obviously read that rather than rushing at the 11th hour, you should start preparing early. Now, one thing I want to highlight over here, for most of the subordinate conjunctions, most, not all, you can move the clauses, right, to suit what you want to say. All right, so over here, if you can, identify that because you've got rather coming in rather than, sorry, which is the conjunction, and that would make this part the dependent clause. All right, so you've got the dependent clause coming in first. You've got the independent clause coming in, right, later on in the sentence. You could very well rewrite this like this. And now what you have is you have the independent clause coming in first and the dependent clause coming in later. Now, two things. First of all, in terms of punctuation, right? Do you notice any difference in punctuation? Anyone?
Yes, sir. The second sentence eliminates the need for a comma.
Comma. Okay, good. So the way this goes about, right, is when the subordinate or the dependent clause is mentioned first, then to separate that from the independent clause, and I'm forced to use these grammatical terms, right? I apologize, I know it can be confusing. When the dependent clause is mentioned first, then to separate it from the independent clause, you need to use a comma, right? But if the independent clause is mentioned first and the dependent clause is coming on later, then you don't need a comma. In fact, you don't put a comma, right? So that is one difference, right? In fact, that's the punctuation difference that I mentioned. Now, here's a question for you. Do both of these questions mean the same thing, or is there any kind of difference in the meaning that they're given?
Sir, what was
Sir,
the
both have
question?
same meaning.
What were you saying, Haris?
What was your question?
My question is, I've written this sentence two different ways. It's the same sentence, right? Are both of these versions of this sentence giving the same meaning, or is there any difference?
Same meaning.
Right. Iman says it's the same meaning. What do you say, Haris?
Sir, give me a second. Mm, Sir, the first sentence is more like uh, a suggestion, and the second sentence is more like advising someone.
Kind of the same thing, suggestion and advice. Okay. Now, what I actually wanted to again bring up is one of the technical details of writing. And for the languages I'm aware of, so that's like English, Urdu, and Arabic, and a bit of Persian, I guess. So there's kind of like a similarity in these languages, and I don't know, maybe other languages as well. That there is emphasis. I'll put that here. There is emphasis on what is mentioned first. Right? So overall, overall what you're saying is the same. In both these sentences, what you're saying is the same. Agreed. But the subtle difference is, right, in the first sentence, your emphasis, and I hope you both of you understand emphasis, right? The stress that you're giving, the importance that you're giving to one part of what you're saying right, is in the first one, you're saying like, don't rush, right? Don't, sorry, not like, don't leave it for the last, right, 11th hour. That is your focus. Whereas in the second sentence, your focus is that you're telling the person that you should start early. Okay. Overall, it's the same thing, just a bit of emphasis. And that's kind of like common in the other languages I mentioned, right? If you think about in Urdu, right, for example, right, there's a sentence where you're saying, right, बच्चे बाहर खेल रहे हैं, right? And so, right, in that case, you're like, the way you say it, it's an emphasis on, is that like, बच्चे हैं जो बाहर खेल रहे हैं, right? So your focus is on the बच्चे. Whereas, right, so it's not someone else, it's the kids. Whereas if you say the same sentence like this, बाहर खेल रहे हैं बच्चे, and so your emphasis is on their location, right? They're not playing in the house, they're outside, although you're saying the same thing. Do you understand that? Okay, so I hope you do, right? If there's any confusion with that, you can ask. So if you just like think about it, right? And this is something to do with writing and speaking as well, right? So whatever you mention first will have a bit of emphasis put on it. All right. So coming next to time, right? Let's do, I don't know, now that. If you have any question, you can obviously ask or put in the chat, whichever you're comfortable with. So we have now that. Okay, and you can give me your suggestions for sentences. I'm going to come up with my own. So what I have is, okay, so that's the one I have. Okay, Sarah or Sarah in Urdu. Sarah will rejoin her job now that she is feeling better. Right. Do you guys have anything? And again, right, so just to hit that point home, which I just talked about, you can write it this way. Comma, because you mentioned dependent clause first. All right, in fact, in this case, what you can do is you can flip the name and the pronoun, because the pronoun normally comes after you've already mentioned the actual noun that it's referring to. So I'll just make that correction over here, right? So I'll put in Sarah over here and she over here. Okay, so Iman has a sentence. She says, now that you have money, you can buy that dress you wanted. All right, so that's good. All right. And as I mentioned, right, you can do this flip for most of the subordinating conjunctions in complex sentences, not all of them, but most of them. Okay, there are a few which don't work this way. And again, right, which one you do is for what you want to put emphasis on, whatever you want to mention first, right? So there is that, subtle difference in meaning. Okay, next up we have concession. So concession we can do, right? Although, or right, just though. I mean, though and although are like technically the same thing. Can I fit it down here? Let's try. Although, or concession. So what do I have? Let's check. Okay. So what I have, for some reason, I don't know whether it's my system or my app, it's lagging. Anyway, so although we have, right, for the sentence we have, excuse me, right, we have, they struggled to answer the questions although they had prepared well for the test, right? So you can give me a question, just give me a minute, I'm sorry. Right, my apologies for that. And uh, like, are you having difficulty coming up with a sentence for this one?
Sir, what word are we making a sentence for?
Although,
Although, give me a minute.
okay, Iman says, although she had done breakfast, she still decided to order even more food. I think perhaps the only suggestion I'd make for this sentence is although she had had breakfast, right? So you can have those two hads together. Although she had had breakfast, she still decided to order even more food. Uh, Although he faced backlash on the internet, he didn't back away from his decision. Right? Okay, that's a good sentence. You're probably arguing in the Facebook comment section, right? Okay. Next we have, let's move these back down. Okay, next we have reason, right? And for reason, we can pick, I don't know, since. And we can say, since you're here early, can you help setting up the stall? All right, so that's a question. We can also have questions like, you don't have to be declarative sentences, all of them, right? We can have questions, we can have requests, right? So the imperatives. So that's one, and right, so I had since, like the dependent clause mentioned first. Do we have sent, like, okay, fine. So, right, sentences on your part, I'd like, right? Iman has given, since he was done with his exams, he decided to start an internship. Okay, right, that's good. Haris, do you have a sentence, right, you'd like to share?
Yes, sir, I have one.
Will you be joining us in the dance since you bought that tuxedo? I don't know what tuxedos have to do with dances. I mean, there's probably context you could add to that sentence. You could, make that perhaps like, will you be joining us at the ball, or at the fundraiser, or at the event? You could change that. Will you be joining us at the event since you bought that tuxedo? Right? That will make it easier to follow instead of the
All right.
dance. Right? Again, right, standalone sentences is always context that's involved. So, it really depends on what it is you're trying to say. These are obviously just examples. Okay, now we're just doing one of each, right? And so, I mean, there's all of the rest, and I'll share that with you. For place, right? Let's do where, right? Simple, where. And for that, we can, let me see what I have. Mm, so it's a bit of a long sentence. I live in a neighborhood where everyone gets together for dinner once a month. That's a good neighborhood. marking all the subordinate and conjunctions that we used. Okay. So, okay, Haris, the sentence you've given is just a direct question, right? So it's good. Uh, it's good that you brought that up. You can see that there's a difference between the where that is used as a conjunction and the where that is used as what you call it, a question, right? And so the one that we're using as a conjunction is not the one that you're going to use as a question, right? It's not one of the W5H question words. The other sentence you've given, how did you take your cat to the park where pets are not allowed? Okay, that works, I guess. And Iman has given, why would you stay in a place where you don't gain respect? That also works, right? Both of those questions and complex sentences using where, so that works. That's right, good. I like those responses. Okay, how much time do you have? Like 4 minutes. So let's see what we can manage. Condition, right? Uh, let's do provided that, right? Sounds, it's bigger, so, right, let's do that. Although bigger doesn't necessarily mean more difficult to use. Provided that, again, this is from the if category, the agar category that I talked about, the Urdu agar, right? Right. So we can say, you can have negatives as well. Right, so this is a negative. Your sentence doesn't always have to be in the affirmative, the positive sense, right? You can have a negative coming in as well. So doesn't, does not. Right, so whatever kind of sentences, like the declarative and the imperative and the interrogative and all that, you can have that with complex sentences. You can have affirmatives or negative, right? I'm using all that grammatical jargon. All right, so Jamil's new job doesn't have a strict schedule, provided that he meets his deadlines. Okay, provided that the two popular subjects are optional, made many students befuddled. Okay, provided that doesn't fit in this one.
Yes, sir.
The way you use it, provided that in the sentence that you've given in the chat, it doesn't fit, and also you won't add a comma right after the conjunction.
Oh, okay.
Can you see it now, Imam?
Ji, sir.
Okay. Acha, so can we improve your sentence? So we could say, for example, provided that the two popular subjects are optional, you could put it like,
So thus many students were befuddled given that provided that the two popular subjects were optional.
नहीं, that still doesn't give a condition, right? Condition इस तरीके से होगी कि, right, so the sentence is that, as long as the deadlines are being met, he's doing his work on time. Jamil doesn't have a strict schedule for his job, right? So that is one depends on the other, right? So meeting the deadlines, not having a strict schedule depends on meeting the deadlines. If you're doing your work on time, acha, the meeting's about to end. I just realized that. Right, there's just one left. We'll come back to it in the next class, and I'll give you a suggestion on WhatsApp for this sentence you have, or maybe like try and making it fit.
Sure, sir.
Okay. All right, so I'll stop here, and we'll continue the next class, inshallah, with a new topic.